a pleasure being here today. I'd love to see such a lovely group of, individuals and people who are active out in the community. I'm looking forward to sharing the information that we have for you today. I've been a gardener my whole life, basically since I was a little kid. I've been a master gardener here in Las Vegas for the last 5 years. After I killed so many plants, I decided I better figure out what I'm doing. And if any of you have ventured into gardening in the desert, you realize it is a challenge to garden in the desert. So one of the things that we do at the University of Nevada, Reno Extension Office here down in Las Vegas is we try and do a lot of outreach to the public with information on gardening to help you be more successful in your gardening hobby. And I have somewhat gravitated myself in the last 10 years that I've been out here to working and enjoying the native plants that basically evolved in this climate and belong here. Because it seems that so many of the plants that you see if you go to the local nurseries are plants that really don't belong in this climate whatsoever. And we struggle to keep them alive, and then we feel bad when we fail, when it's the fact that we're not being given the proper choices. So at the University Extension Office, we have our botanical garden that we have available for people to come and view. It's a multi-acre site where we do a lot of research on what plants do well here. And I've gravitated again towards the native plants because I just really enjoy and am amazed at the variety that we have available here in Southern Nevada. And I'm also in charge of our seed bank. And I have brought with me today some wildflower seeds that we can give 2 packets away to each individual of wildflower seeds that you can take home for free. If you want more, I will also give you information on where you can call our helpline, our Master Gardener helpline, and they can give you information on all 38 varieties that we have available to the public for free. Because many of these seeds are unobtainium elsewhere. You can't go online or you can't go to Star Nursery and find some of these local native flowers. And these are the ones that our beneficial organisms, our birds, bees, and butterflies, these are the ones they recognize. So it makes ultimate sense to try and cultivate those that actually belong here and kind of recreate the ecosystem that these animals and insects will thrive on. Okay, here we go. I have a couple of helpers here today. Veronica is my neighbor in Spring Valley, and she's going to be coming around with the sign-in sheet. If you haven't had a chance to sign in, please do so. Our funding at the university is based upon our level of outreach. The more people we document that we chat with or talk to, the better our funding will be in the coming years. So please feel free to sign in. You can just put your name if that's all you're comfortable with. If you don't mind adding the demographic information, that also helps us prove that we outreach to as many demographic groups as possible. And also there's a spot for you to put your email address. We do have a community newsletter for gardeners that comes about every other month. Does anybody here already get our community newsletter? Anybody? Okay, maybe a couple. It's really helpful. It has a lot of good gardening information and free classes that are available through the university. So feel free if you want to get our newsletter to add your email address, and please print neatly. So many people, you're used to writing it so many times and it's all scribbled and we can't read it. So please, if you give us your email address, try and do it as neatly as possible. Also on the back table, there will be some other handouts for you. Some of you may have already grabbed this. And then Alex has volunteered to go around if people haven't gotten this particular handout. This is something we're going to be working on during my presentation. It's a group project here, and it is the National Wildlife Federation checklist to become certified. And he has also pencils there if you need something to write with. So if everybody wants to grab a copy of that as Alex comes around, and then we will go through this sheet step by step and show you all the things that are required to become certified. Okay. So on the back table, also feel free to grab our little bookmark, which on one side has our helpline information, our location. We operate the helpline Monday through Friday from 9 to 3. So if you have any gardening questions, just call us up. People are sitting around getting bored, waiting for the phone to ring. So feel free to call us with gardening questions that you have. On the opposite side of that is information on our research orchard that we have up in North Las Vegas. which is open Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays from 9 a.m. until noon. And they have organic produce up there, about 15 or 20 different types of trees that they're growing produce on. And they have to collect them and weigh them for their research. But then they sell them to the public for like $2 a pound for fresh organic fruit right off the tree. So become a good friend of them. Drive on up there if you're interested in some fresh fruit. And they also have herbs and grapes and a lot of other things up there. This is the University Research Orchard. It's on the back of our little bookmark that we have on the back table. So if you haven't gotten one on the way out, feel free to grab that. And it's up in North Las Vegas. It has our address and our hours on it. They also sell fruit trees over the winter. If you have one that you really like, an apricot that you like, or a peach that you really like, they can sell you that tree that you can grow in your own yard. Okay, so these are just some of the things we have on the back table there. We also have a very interesting book called Trees for Tomorrow, which is an amazing guide, multi-page guide that talks about a lot of the native trees that do well in this climate, how to cultivate them, how to enjoy them in your yard. So before you go, be sure to check out the table and take whatever freebies that you want. I also will be back there at the end of the presentation. If you do want some wildflower seeds, just make a little bit of a line there and I'll take care of you one at a time and let you go home with a couple packets of wildflower seeds if you want to try some at home. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the presentation. Okay. Okay, it's unfortunate it's not forwarding. There we go. So the presentation I have is how to transform your yard into a certified wildlife habitat. And the subtitle is Lessons That I Learned from Hummingbirds. And I have a few cute little stories in here of things that, information that they gave me, little tips that they gave to help me on my journey to having a certified wildlife habitat in my backyard. Now we will take questions at the end. And so people on Zoom can hear us. We'll pass around a microphone so you can ask your question. So everybody here and on Zoom will be able to hear your question. And then at the very end, I will get questions on Zoom. So if any of you are watching on Zoom and you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat and we will get to those at the end. So this is definitely a work in progress. This is my initial certified wildlife habitat talk. Since I put this together a few years ago, I have an intermediate talk and now I'm working on an advanced talk as I get more information to share. So this is the beginning of a journey, basically. And obviously with any topic, you can't expect that you're going to be able to teach everybody everything they need to know in just 1 hour. But hopefully this will pique your interest, get you motivated, give you some basic tools that you will feel comfortable delving into this project, which I think is a very worthy project for us to try and not only enjoy our own yard as a person, but to be able to share the benefits of our landscape with the environment around us. It's a real win-win. Okay. Now, what's interesting is the National Wildlife Federation guidance is designed for anyone in the United States. So it's very generic. So when I tried to put together this first presentation, I wanted to say, well, what can I tell people that is specific to the Southwest that would be helpful? And that has been part of my personal journey, is to learn more about what animals need here, which animals we do have here, which creatures we have here, and what sustains them. So this will give you an idea of where we can begin on that. Do we have any questions before we get started? Anybody want to raise your hand if you have a question? If not, we'll wait till the end then. Okay, I'm going to start out with the hamburger story. This is a true story. My son, who's now 38, when he was 4 years old and he was going to daycare 3 days a week, I picked him up one spring morning and I said, what do you want to do for lunch? And he says, Burger King. So we're driving over to Burger King. And just to make conversation, I said, well, what did you learn in school today? He said, we learned about plants and how they grow. And being an avid gardener, that was, oh, this is so cool, right? So we get to Burger King, we order our burgers, and he just unwraps it and he doesn't start eating it right away. He's just studying very carefully. And he reaches down with his plump little fingers, picks off a sesame seed off of the bun, and he holds it up very proud. Mom, this is a seed. And I said, that's right. He said, if I plant it, will a hamburger grow? So a little bit of information can be a dangerous thing, right? So we're going to try and get a little beyond that and give you enough information that you feel comfortable pursuing this particular endeavor of certifying your yard. Okay. So basically, what is a certified wildlife habitat? As defined by the National Wildlife Federation, it is an area where animals and beneficial insects that are native to the area can obtain food and water, find shelter, raise their young, and for us to do this while using what we call sustainable practices. Okay. Now, what a wildlife habitat is not, it is not an animal rescue, it's not a zoo, or it's not a place where you have to be responsible for specific animals. It's basically building an oasis for local wildlife. And it is so true. You've all seen that movie, Field of Dreams. Build it and they will come. This is so true for a wildlife habitat. And I have a few examples to show you how quickly those creatures will find your efforts and then start enjoying them. So they're designed, the program is designed for obviously birds, both songbirds and hummingbirds, also butterflies, a lot of our beneficial bees, local native bees, and some of our reptiles as well. So it is a very broad program, and some people even include bats in their conservation efforts as well. Okay. So the National Wildlife Federation has this program they call Gardening for Wildlife on their website. And they have documented over 250,000 spaces have now been certified throughout the United States. That's over 1.5 million acres that have been dedicated to certified wildlife habitats. And that includes not only people's backyards, but schools and college campuses, corporate properties, farms, and parks. And their goal is to reach 1 million sites if they can at some point in the future. So that's where we're trying to help encourage folks to become part of this program. And I'm preaching to the choir on this one, but we try and talk about why wildlife habitats are important, particularly in urban areas. We're seeing wildlife being pushed out as our urban areas expand. Our bee populations have been plummeting. Our butterfly populations are also at risk. And as we know, certain bird species are threatened. I recently read an interesting article about a research study that was done in England of a particular type of bird that has its babies every year, the same time of year. But unfortunately, the insects that the bird feeds to its babies have been developing earlier because the insect population are more geared towards temperature as a trigger for their reproduction, rather than daylight, nighttime, as we do find for birds. So they will find that the insects will emerge 2 weeks before the baby birds arrive. So the babies have no food. And some of these bird populations are plummeting as a result of this. And they're saying that it is because our temperatures in the springtime we're warming up on average earlier than we have in the past. Our summer times also are hotter, daytime and nighttime temperatures. So it's becoming a real challenge for animals as well as those of us who are gardeners to deal with some of these changes that we're seeing. Okay. Does anybody currently have a certified wildlife habitat? Anybody in the group here currently certified? Okay. Occasionally we have a few that are, if so, congratulations. If not, we're going to talk about the certification process. How do we become certified? First, we have to evaluate your yard. What are your strengths, weaknesses? What's your budget like? And then we'll talk about suitable plants. And we try to embrace, as we said, the native plant species that do so well in combination with our local wildlife. We'll talk a little bit about irrigation strategies and planting at the right time of year. I would not embark on this project, say in the middle of July, and start planting things in your yard. Would not be a good time. So typically over the winter is an early spring or late fall is when we get a lot of these activities going in our yard. And then we'll talk about how you would be maintain or obtain certification and then to maintain what you have created. Okay. So what is your current landscape style? Some of you may have like a lush aesthetic California shrubs and trees and things all lined up and pruned perfectly. Some people have low maintenance or no maintenance, maybe just gravel. Some people may have a focused garden. I have some rosarian friends in town who have over 1,000 rose bushes in their yard. That's a very focused gardening style. Yeah. Then we have xeriscape, people who have desert landscaping and desert adapted plants. People have yards that have only what the HOA allows. Okay. Some people have whatever was still there or whatever was there when I moved in or whatever is still alive after last year. So there's many different landscape styles that we have in the valley here, but any of these can become certified. Okay. So basically we need to have the required number of elements in each of the following. And that's what your little check sheet that you have in front of you is. It goes through each of these different items and then asks you to have a certain number of each to qualify. You have to have a certain number of food sources, at least one water source, a number of sources for shelter for the animals, places for them to raise their young, and to use sustainable practices. This is my little courtyard bed at my house in Spring Valley, which is about 4 feet by 8 feet. And with the proper planning of different types of plants there, and maybe a bird feeder and maybe a little bird bath, this could actually qualify as a certified wildlife habitat. You don't need to have acres and acres in order to do it. If planned properly, you can create a certified habitat in a fairly small space. So don't let that hold you back. Okay. So the first category we'll look at is food. Does your habitat provide at least 3 food sources for wildlife? This could include native plants that offer seeds, berries, nuts, nectar. And in this climate, we want things that are year-round, because we do have a lot of different beneficials that are active year-round. And as was mentioned earlier, we have different creatures that are migrating through, different butterflies and birds that will be migrating through. So we want to try and have a diverse type of yard where we have something blooming all the time if we can. Okay. Also, we want to cultivate healthy insect populations. So we're not encouraging people to use a lot of pesticides in their yard, because our birds are attracted to some kind of protein. And if we have good insect populations for them to feed off of, you will attract more birds into your yard. Okay. Or if people are short on space or have a certain time of year where you don't have something, we can have supplemental bird feeders. But they can attract some undesirables, as we may know, pigeons, rodents. And I'm going to tell you an interesting story about praying mantises and bird feeders in a little bit. Okay. A lot of people are gearing now towards pollinator gardens, trying to have some perennials and then some seasonal annuals to provide that 12 months of nectar out of the year. But be aware that not all plants are good sources of nectar. One of my favorite winter plants are pansies, because they're so pretty and they're so colorful and they bloom and they're pretty carefree, but your beneficials do not find any interest in pansies. They have very little nectar to offer to bees or butterflies. So if you buy pansies, that's for you. Okay. Yeah, for the mild life, not for the wildlife. Okay. So it's important for us to look at those plants that definitely do offer proper nectar. And we'll be talking about some of those as we go along. Okay. The National Wildlife Federation has this, it's kind of a long-winded paragraph, but I think it's very important. It has a lot of good concepts in it. The basic premise is that native plants are best. They're always the best choice to support pollinators because their life cycles are in sync with each other. Some native plants put forth their blossoms at the same time that bees emerged in the early spring, and others bloom later when hummingbirds return from migration. So some of your early spring bloomers would be your poppies, your bluebells, and your firecracker penstemon. Some native plants bloom in late summer and fall when the monarch butterflies are migrating, such as your Salvia gregii and your alkali golden bush. Many bees have a strong preference for the nectar and pollen of native plants that share their range. For example, the creosote bush. is very instrumental in helping our native bee populations. And bees may get a bad rap sometimes, but our native bees are generally very docile, and some of the species are more productive than honeybees or bumblebees will ever be. They're just amazing in what powerhouses they are as far as pollination is concerned. And our butterfly caterpillars, certain ones can only eat the leaves of a small number of native plants that they evolved with. And with the increased use of pesticides in the country, particularly in farming areas, we're seeing our milkweed populations have plummeted. So we do offer milkweed seeds of a number of varieties. Typically our rush milkweed is the local milkweed that thrives in Southern Nevada. And we also offer at the university Arizona milkweed, which is like a more diminutive, smaller version, which is also very lovely with little white flowers on it. And they are great sources where the monarchs can lay their eggs so that their larvae can eat the milkweed and then be somewhat toxic if other animals try and eat them. So that's a very important part of their lifestyle. Now, another thing that we have researched that looked at the amount of insects that we have on native trees versus the amount of insect population and distribution that we have on non-native trees. And if you're trying to, again, attract birds to your yard to eat insects, then native trees are best. So some lovely examples of native trees would be the desert willow, which gets a beautiful snapdragon azalea type flower on it. It comes in a variety of colors. Can also be started from seed, as well as you can buy the bushes at nurseries. Mesquites are also good for insect populations, and the western redbud. These are just 3 examples. But the one book that we have in the back on Trees for Tomorrow has at least a dozen or more wonderful choices for local trees, different sizes, different presentations to them that you can choose from. So think about adding an extra tree. I think Arbor Day is coming up, right? End of April, right? Arbor Day is coming up, so that would be a good time to plant a tree. Okay. Now, a lot of our native wild bee populations are very much struggling, and there's quite a few different plants that will be good for those. Prickly pear, cholla cacti, globe mallow, which is a flower that we have seeds for, the Texas ebony, palo verde, and mesquite trees. And the number one important plant, as we said, for the bees is the creosote bush. They do sell those at some of the local nurseries. We do have seeds for that, but it's one of the most slow growing bushes out there that you're probably best to get some satisfaction out of it is to actually buy one from the nursery rather than trying to start them from seed. Okay. Now, how many people here grow roses? Okay, we have some rose people in the crowd. What's nice about roses is that they provide a long period of nectar for bees and butterflies. But the ones that they find most useful are the floribunda, or the ones that have a very open face to them. The ones that are hybrid tea, where all of the petals cover the pollen and nectar, it's very hard for them to get into those. So a lot of your hummingbirds and your bees and butterflies will just zoom right past a hybrid tea, but they would much rather enjoy a floribunda type rose. Okay. Also, one of the banes of existence of rosarians is the leafcutter bee, which, as you can see, leaves lovely Swiss cheese holes in the leaves, and they use that to line their nests. And if they get real fancy, they'll also take some of the petals, because they want color on their walls, right? They'll do that. And a lot of rosarians, how can I get rid of those? I go, well, we don't want to put insecticides on these things, because then that'll affect the creatures that will take the nectar from that plant. So I say, this is a badge of honor that they decided to take your rose leaves and use them for their nest. So consider that a bit of pride and a badge of honor, rather than cursing those lovely bees that are trying to help us out. If we have vegetables or fruit trees in our yard, we're going to need those bees to help cross-pollinate these things. So bees are our friends, and the leafcutter bee can do the job of 20 honeybees. Yeah. So we definitely want to encourage and cultivate the native bee populations in our garden. Okay. But do be careful of what pesticides we use. I'm a member of a couple of different rose societies, and they have their rose shows in the spring where they bring their prize roses and they have competitions and everything. So they're very, very much encouraged to have the perfect rose, which means spraying chemicals on them to keep the insects away. So again, we're trying to discourage that as much as possible. A lot of the neonicotinoid systemic insecticides that have been applied, they uptake through the entire plant, the leaves, the stems, the flowers, the pollen, all toxic. So we have to really try and limit our use of those as much as possible. Okay. And it's not just one thing to look out for. There's many different neonicotinoids that come under many different names. And I think they do that just to try and, confuse us a little bit. But just keep in mind that any systemic insecticide, we should try and avoid that if you are trying to develop a certified habitat. Also, how many of you grow herbs? Okay, great. Because herb gardens can be beneficial to wildlife as well as us, wildlife. Okay. Dill and parsley are good host plants for the black swallowtail butterfly, and rosemary, lavender, basil, and oregano blooms have a wonderful source of nectar. So it's something that we can enjoy and that we can share with nature. Okay. If you want to use, there's so many different butterfly and bird feeders out there. So be careful what you choose, and also know which types of birds you are trying to attract. It's not all bird seed is universal. There are different types of bird seed for different types of birds. And you guys should know that better than anybody. Again, preaching to the choir on that. But again, we know that that can attract other creatures that may not be that good for us. If you decide to do hummingbird feeders, make sure you do it right or don't do it at all. They're very tricky in this climate because you have sugar water sitting out in the heat. And what's it going to do? It's going to ferment. And it doesn't take more than a couple of days for that to happen. So every few days, we should be cleaning it out, scrubbing all the surfaces, and putting in fresh syrup for them that we make with 4 parts water, 1 part sugar. Make sure it comes to a full boil and then cool it down. We don't want to add any red dye. That's not necessary. We don't really recommend the commercial hummingbird food. Don't use any honey or artificial sweeteners. Okay. And don't just top it off. If it gets low, top it off. Every couple of days in this climate, we definitely need to totally clean it out and refill it. I said I was going to tell you about the praying mantis. There was an interesting study done. This was from the National Wildlife Federation magazine from back in 2018, where a study was done between Swiss and US researchers, where they found that sometimes praying mantises will hide on the underneath side of your hummingbird feeders. So when an unsuspecting hummingbird comes up to feed, they will actually snag it and they will kill it and eat it. Yes. Yes. Isn't that crazy? Now, in some parts of the country and also in Europe, they have some larger praying mantises that can get to be almost 6 inches long. And I believe those are probably more the culprit than what we have here. Or don't we have pretty much smaller ones? Yeah. Yeah. I don't think it's as much of an issue, but I just thought that was such a fascinating research project that I would share that with you. Now, here's my first hummingbird story. This is our backyard in Spring Valley, where we have planted a lot of native plants over the years. But when we first moved in 13 years ago, it was weeds and gravel and dead tree stumps from the previous owner. So we were dreaming, what are we going to do back here? My husband and I were sitting out back one morning, cup of tea in our little rocking chairs, just rocking back and forth. And this is cool property. We got all this land. What are we going to do with it? And then all of a sudden, this hummingbird flies in and he hovers right here for about 10 seconds. Then he goes here, hovers for about 10 seconds, and then he leaves. And I said, that's where she had her feeders, right? Because who was talking about they know where to look for food? John, where are you? Yep, they know where to look for food. And at the time, my husband and I still had our business in Chicago. So we would go back and forth, maybe spend half of our time at the home here and half of our time in Illinois. So my husband looks at me and says, "You're gonna put some feeders up?" And I said, "Absolutely not." And he was shocked. I said, "No, we're not gonna be here all the time. I can't put a source of food and then leave for a month. That's not fair to them. Instead, we're gonna fill our yard with flowering plants that will be here when we're in Illinois and will be suitable for those birds to feed on when we're gone." So now we have over 100 different varieties of plants in our yard. What didn't help was our son bought the house next door and he said, "Mom, the yard is yours." So I had more dirt to play in. So I'm dangerous. That's all I could say. I just become very dangerous. Okay. So our backyard now is a consistent area where they can come and they can feed. We have, this is a springtime, so we have chocolate flowers blooming here, more chocolate flowers there. We have our gopher plants blooming as well. And we have some penstemon back there that are blooming. Cassia is blooming. The oleanders are blooming. And gazania is here, another one of my favorites. Blooms 9 months out of the year. You buy them as annuals and they're perennials. I'll show you pictures of gazanias later. Wonderful choice. The bees love them. The butterflies love them. They're beautiful. They're brightly colored and they're very low care. So there's a lot of good choices that we have out there. If you want to attract the hummingbirds, again, we generally look at our tubular flowers, because any open face flower, any bee or butterfly can take the nectar from that. But if it's tubular, it's a lot harder for them to get to it. They actually have some bees now that burrow through the side of the flower now to get to the nectar. But for the most part, your tubular flowers are the ones that are going to be best at attracting your hummingbirds. Okay. I'm not going to take too much time, but they also have a guidance too for tortoises and different native plants that we can give if you're trying to keep a desert tortoise on your property. They are protected. So if you do have a tortoise, there are some guidelines to follow on that. Okay. One other interesting source of food is a mud puddle. And you might think, why is a mud puddle considered a food source? But when you look at the diet of, say, a butterfly, they take nectar from a lot of plants where they get their sugars and carbohydrates, but they generally don't get a lot of minerals and vitamins from nectar. So they generally look for a mud puddle somewhere where the minerals from the soil have dissolved into the water, and then they will sit by that little puddle and they will drink the water. And that's how your bees and your butterflies will get some of their mineral nutrients that they need. Pretty smart. Okay. So I generally like to maintain a little mud puddle. I have a little plastic underneath it. I hold it down with the rocks. I usually keep it in the area that's mostly shady. Good luck trying to keep a puddle going in the summer here in full sun. Good luck with that. So I try and keep it kind of in an area that's somewhat shaded, and that will help attract butterflies to your yard. Something as simple as that. Okay, so now take a look at your handout sheet under the first topic of food and see how many of those check boxes you can check off from your yard. Things that you currently have that would qualify for food. Okay, how many people were able to check off 3 of them? 3 different things. All right, look at that. That's great. That's great. Now, the next category is water. And they would like for your habitat to provide at least one source of water for wildlife. It could be a bird bath, garden fountain, a natural stream or pond, kind of like what we have here at the wetlands. Even a water dish with a rock or sponge to perch on. That's the picture there is from Springs Preserve, their little their butterfly pavilion, where they have that for the butterflies to drink off of. You don't want water that's too deep, because your bees and your butterflies can't really sit in the water. So it's nice to have like a rock in the center where they can land on the rock and then they can reach down and they can drink the water that is in your water feature. Okay, so keep that in mind if you are using something like a statue. You'd have to find some way to put a little stone or something where the birds can reach the water, and the butterflies and bees also. Okay, a swimming pool can work depending upon if you have any little floating solar pads or something where they can get down to where they are close to the water rather than having to hover over the water. Those could work as well. And consistency is important here too, just like with the hummingbird feeders. You want to make sure that the water is fairly clean and changed periodically as needed. Okay. One of the things in the water section of your handout is what's called a water garden, okay, and a rain garden. This is something that is more appropriate in other parts of the country. In fact, before we moved from Illinois, we had problems with flooding on our streets. We would get very heavy rain. You get 3 feet of rain a year. We would get a lot of flooding on our streets. So our community put in rain gardens, little recessed areas that parallel the street with native plants in it. So when we get a lot of rain, the rain will go into the rain gardens and it would stay off the streets. And the water would remain there generally for a number of days. Okay? But in this climate, if you even have a rain garden, it's not, this is actually my son's front yard. This was year 1 after I put a recessed native flower wash in my son's front yard. This does not get water constantly. So that would not qualify in our climate. If you have something like a recessed area with flowers in it, that we might call a rain garden is not really what we would call a reliable source of water for that. But what we designed it to have plastic underneath all the area that's not landscaped, and then water comes off the roof, travels down into this area. So this will concentrate the water that we get from a rainfall. And that's why when you see in nature, where are plants growing in nature, they are growing in the gullies, the lower areas where the water tends to gravitate. So in this way, we're trying to imitate nature in how we plant our species in areas where they're going to do the best. Also, we put in a number of accent rocks, trying to make it look more natural or native to this area, rather than lining all the plants up in a nice little neat row. We kind of had them, randomly in the flower bed to try and make it more attractive to local wildlife. Okay. So take a look at the form, the second section, see if you can tick off one water source that you might have in your yard. Anybody have a water source at this point? All right, look at that. That's wonderful. That's great. Okay. The next item is, do we have cover? Places in your habitat that the wildlife can use as a refuge. If there's a big windstorm, if there's rain that comes, or if they're being pursued by a predator, is there some place that they can take cover? Okay. If you have some dense vegetation, this is again where your rose bushes can be very good place for a bird to escape to if he's being followed by a hawk or something. Brush or a rock pile, vines or trellises, some type of a cave or roosting boxes. This is actually my backyard, and this is a cave that my husband built in our backyard because he could. And we needed more parking for some of our antique cars. So he said, let's not just put another building up there, let's put a cave. So we're big fans of the movies Back to the Future. Okay, so we have the Delgado mine in our backyard, just like from Back to the Future 3. And that's my husband's DeLorean time machine that we park there from time to time. But I've been in the backyard working on things, and then I'll get a really big gust of wind or we'll get some rain, and I will actually see hummingbirds and butterflies take refuge inside that cave. Yeah, they're smart. They know where to go. So it has served a number of purposes that I never dreamed of when we decided to build that. Is that a rain barrel? Oh yeah, the question is that a rain barrel? Yes, it is. And the hardest thing in Southern Nevada is finding a place that sells gutters. Gutters, what's that? What do you need those for? But you multiply all the 1/4 inch of rain over a huge roof, you get a lot of rain. And we have filled that rain barrel many, many times with a 1/4 or less than a 1/2 inch of rain. Yeah. So that, and the native plants just love to be watered with that rainwater rather than the chlorinated water we get from the tap. Yeah, so we have a few rain barrels in our yard. Okay. They also sell, or you can make yourself, roosting boxes, which is where you're, for example, these are bee roosting boxes where they can vacation when they're not working. And people put these in their yards. Typically, I like to recommend at the back of the yard. You don't want to put it right by the back door where the kids are going in and out. You want to put it somewhere farther out in the yard, about eye level or higher up. And if you have fruits and vegetables in your yard and you want to attract bees to help pollinate, these are a very good idea. Okay. Now, they also talk about roosting boxes for birds at the National Wildlife Federation website, but I've talked to a number of birders here in the valley, and they say that a lot of our birds are do-it-yourselfers. They would kind of rather make their own rather than use a prefab. Does anybody have any other comments or insight into that? Yes. Okay, they're perfectly happy to have some dense vegetation rather than a prefab birdhouse. Okay, so that's kind of what I figured, but I wanted to show this just to say a lot of people will go out and buy these cute little birdhouses and hang them up. And we generally find they don't get as much reception as we might see in other parts of the country. So just keep that in mind. Do your homework on that as far as what birds you're trying to attract, what size, even what color the house can be, can affect if the bird is going to accept it or not. Kind of interesting. And then again, for tortoises, we usually like to have some type of doghouse or some shredded newspaper where they can winter over, as we know that they like to hibernate. So people will put them in the garage, whatever. But there's a number of tortoise societies that have a lot more information on cover for your tortoises. Okay, so take a look at your checklist. See if you have at least 2 sources of shelter in your yard. How many people were able to tick off 2 or more? All right, this is looking really good. Okay, we'll take a look at the next criteria is places to raise young. We want to have at least 2 places where wildlife can raise their young. Obviously for birds, we're thinking trees, shrubs where they can make their nests. Also host plants for our caterpillars, such as our milkweed is good for our caterpillars for butterflies, dirt mounds for reptiles, bird houses as appropriate, rocky soil, dead wood. A lot of the local bees don't make specific hives, but they will like to bore into like some old rotting wood. So if you have like a little wood pile with some old, funky wood there, they would love that. And again, the leaf cutter bees, or leaf clutter, I'm sorry, under bushes is good for butterflies. So if you have one corner of the backyard that you can leave more natural, let the leaves lie there, maybe a few twigs and things. That's where some of your butterfly species will lay their eggs. And also some of your birds will look in these cooler areas of your yard for some of the insects that might be hiding in amongst the leaf litter, okay? So if somebody, comes by and they see your yard's not perfectly cleaned up, it's like, I have a wildlife habitat. I'm not lazy. I have a wildlife habitat. Okay. Gives you a good cover story. Okay. So take a look at your sheet and see if you have at least 2 places for wildlife to raise their young in your yard. Okay. How many people were able to tick off at least 2? Okay, this is good. Okay. Now, the last criteria is to do this using sustainable practices. So we want to utilize at least 2 of the following 3 concepts in your yard. Some type of soil or water conservation, controlling invasive or exotic species, and or using organic practices. So for the first one, if you want to qualify in this area, you would limit your water use and don't have a lot of plants that require lots of water every day. Again, using the native plants is better. Do you make your own compost? Do you put mulch on top of plants so that they don't get so much evaporation and the roots stay cooler and you need less water for that? Are we reducing our lawns and pavement? This pavement will radiate a lot of heat back into the atmosphere, and our lawns basically benefit no creatures that are beneficial, insects or animals. It really, lawns are just nice for us to look at. They have very little benefit in the ecosystem for wildlife. Okay? Rather than using spray irrigation, we like to use soaker hoses, drip irrigation type things, or install desert landscaping and a desert wash. Okay? As we just mentioned, we want to use more of a drip system rather than the spray system, because otherwise we get a lot of evaporation into the air. We want to try and minimize that. Okay. Also, we want to control exotic species. A lot of our native species are somewhat slow growing. And if we have a lot of other weed type plants in the mix, they can outproduce and they can take away from the native plants and their viability. So we want to try and remove any invasive species. Does anybody recognize this lovely grass down here? Isn't it pretty? It's so pretty, but it is invasive. It is a fountain grass that you see them popping up all over the valley, okay? And we try and eliminate those as much as possible because they will definitely outcompete a lot of the natives that we may have in our yard. Also, if we're trying to attract birds, we don't want to have cats out there hunting them down. So that's kind of a tough choice for some people that like to, have their cats have a very full life, but we generally, the Wildlife Federation recommends that we keep cats indoors if we're trying to attract birds to the yard. Also, the Nevada Native Plant Society also cautions us that we don't want to allow natives and non-natives to hybridize. We have a couple of very pretty penstemon that bloom in this part of the valley. We have the red firecracker penstemon, and then we have the kind of pinkish parrii penstemon. But then people bring in, oh, there's a really pretty blue one that's called the Rocky Mountain penstemon. Isn't that pretty? And that grows in Colorado at higher elevations. So if we were to crossbreed those, we would end up with a species that probably will lose some of its adaptability and viability in this climate. So their thought is, let's stick with the natives and try not to get too creative with hybridizing them and making all these pretty fancy special varieties that may not really be good, and they may not be recognized by some of our native animals. They've done so much with echinacea to make doppelganger ones with like 2 layers of flowers on it, or kind of one that looks more like a puffball than anything else. And your natives are like, what the heck is that? So if you're going to go with an echinacea, stick with the typical native, echinacea that we, if you want to get a doppelganger, or if you want to get another razzmatazz one, that again is for you, not for the wildlife. Okay. And organic practices. Again, we try and eliminate the use of a lot of our chemical fertilizers and pesticides as much as possible, particularly the systemic ones that get into the nectar as well. Make your own compost instead of buying fertilizers as much. And also, you can use some of our beneficial insects. For those of us that with roses, aphids in the springtime is one of the banes of our existence, right? All on the new growth, here we see all these aphids. Well, we can hose them down. If the buds haven't opened up yet, you can hose them down with some just regular water from your hose. You can spray on like a Castile soap that actually dissolves the outer casing of the aphid, and then that washes away. Or one of my favorite practices is to use this little guy. You can go to like Star Nursery and you can buy a container of 1,500 ladybugs. They're kept in the fridge, so they're still kind of sleepy. So if you want to use them, you let them sit on the counter, let them warm up and wake up, okay? And then we will, this is one of my rose bushes. This is my 8-foot tall Queen Elizabeth rose. And near dusk, I hose down the rose bush. I put paper plates with a little stick through it to hold them in place at different parts of the rose bush. Then you sprinkle on some of your ladybugs, and they overnight will roam off of the paper plate, and they'll find those aphids and munch them down. Okay. Then when they're done and the bush is free of aphids, they'll fly away and find something else to eat. Okay. Now, what is this? Looks awful, doesn't it? Anybody know? It's a baby. Yes, yes, that's the larval. Yeah, that's the juvenile ladybug. So if you see those after you see this, you know, hey, cool. Now you may cultivate a ladybug population in your yard. Wouldn't that be cool? Okay, so keep that in mind. There's a lot of fun ways that we can get around having to spray something with chemicals. Okay. Okay, so now check and see if you have at least two things on in your yard or two practices that you employ that would be considered sustainable. Okay. How many people have two? Wow, this is looking good. Okay. So if you are missing a thing or two, it's a good time to kind of evaluate your yard. What do you need? Do you need more food sources? Do you need more sources for shelter? And what kind of budget do you have? How many of you have caliche problems with your soil? Okay. Does anybody not know what caliche is? A few people? Okay, we have a nice little piece, my pet rock. Veronica, you want to hold it up? Yeah, I have a pet rock. This is a piece of caliche from my yard. Fortunately, I don't have much. We don't, do we, Veronica? Veronica lives next door. We don't have much of it, but it is the kind of the natural creek bed that was here many millennia ago. And when we dig down deep enough in some areas, you'll hit this bedrock, and it is like concrete. It is basically like it's like natural concrete. Very, very hard to get through. In certain parts of the valley, more in the center part of the valley, where over the millennia we had a lot of erosion coming down from the mountains, we have a lot of clay and sandy soil on top of the caliche. Over in Spring Valley, we have to dig down 20 feet before we hit caliche, because we have so much that has settled into our area that we actually can garden. The closer you get to the mountains, typically, is where you're going to find more areas. We have a friend up in Aliante, up in North Las Vegas, and their backyard is solid caliche. I mean, they need a jackhammer to plant a flower. Okay, somebody's going, yeah. You live up, yeah, raised beds.
Years ago, I worked for soil and foundation engineers.
Okay.
Many years ago, I worked for soil and foundation engineers, and we would get the caliche, and one time we decided to test it, and we took the sample, and it was over 5,000 psi.
Wow. Wow. That's better than concrete. Yeah. So, and what I tell people, if you have friends that are moving to the valley and they're avid gardeners, when they go looking at homes, tell them to take a shovel and start snooping to see what you have to work with. Okay. But it's true, a lot of folks that do have caliche problems is they end up just building up and making things in raised beds. So that can be one way to go. And at the university, we have many training classes on container gardening, raised bed gardening, to help give people guidance if you want to grow natives, if you want to grow fruits and vegetables, how to do that in containers. Because a lot of us have that as our only option. Okay, or buy in Spring Valley. We never realized when we bought there how wonderful the soil was. So I really lucked out in that regard. And it's a good idea to try and recycle whatever hardscape you have. When my son bought the house next door and said, "Mom, the yard is yours," we started to excavate up front, and it was what we call a yard lasagna. You know, the latest owner had this pink gravel on top, and then there was some fabric underneath that, and then the previous owner had some brown gravel, and then under that was another layer. So it was just like a lasagna of all these different layers of God knows what. So we separated them all out, and we ended up using everything that we had. The rocks, we got some of those off of Craigslist. We used the pink gravel all around. We put the fabric underneath that, and then we put the brown gravel in the center, and we had almost no waste whatsoever. Nor did we have to go out and spend a lot of money on new hardscape. So as much as possible, it's a good idea to try and reuse your hardscape that you have. So this was year one of my son's garden. This was year two. This is all started from seed. Native flowers started from seed. So it can happen. It really can. And this gets watered maybe once a week in the summertime. But very, very low water usage. I don't have to put any insecticides on it because a lot of your native plants are not susceptible to the local, problems that we have with fungus and bacteria and that kind of thing. They don't need fertilizer. If you put fertilizer on them, some of them don't do that well. They need to be stressed a little bit. They like the native soil. They can handle the high pH soil, the high alkaline soil that we have here. So natives are a really wonderful way to go. Okay. When you look at plants at the nursery, I mean, it can be overwhelming. I mean, there's just so many to choose from. So we generally divide plants into 3 different categories. We have our native plants. Those are the ones that I showed you the picture of just before. They can tolerate our poor alkaline soil, our temperature extremes, and the low water availability. Then we have what are called desert adapted plants, or sometimes we call them near natives. They're plants that evolved in other desert climates, maybe the Sonoran Desert or the Chihuahuan Desert or the Great Basin or the Australian deserts or the deserts from Africa. But not all of them have the low water availability and the temperature extremes that we do. So if you want to expand your palette, then we look at some of the desert adapted plants, which might need a little soil amendment in our native soil. They might need to be placed properly, maybe where they get a little afternoon shade, for example, in your yard. Or they may need a little bit more water than your natives do. But a lot of times they can be planted interspersed together in a garden. Then we have the third variety, which is basically 95% of what they sell at Star Nursery, are your exotics. These are the things that we remember from where we used to live, wherever that may be. Oh, a hibiscus. Oh, this, that, and the other, all these different flowers and things that we used to grow may or may not be good here. Okay. They have to be babied with potting soil, special placement relative to the sun and temperature and wind. You might have to bring them in the wintertime if it's too cold, or in the summertime when it's too hot. So they have to be babied. And it's fine if you enjoy certain exotics, great, enjoy them, but realize they're going to be more work. They may not be anything that your native wildlife is going to recognize. Okay, it's for you. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And I've killed a number of plants before I really learned what the heck I was doing. I treated them all the same. They say, oh, you have a beautiful barrel cactus, and then plant some really frilly petunias around it. Wouldn't that be pretty? It look great for maybe about a week. Okay. Problem is, your cactus wants to be watered about once a month in the summertime. Your petunias want to be watered every day. So somebody's not going to be happy, no matter what you choose. Somebody's not going to be happy. So we try and keep things together. We try and keep our natives kind of in one area with one irrigation strategy. We may have our desert adapted interspersed with some of those, or separate as well on their own irrigation strategy. And then our exotics, which have maybe in pots that we can move them around if we need to, whatever. So just realize when you go out, what you're going to be getting yourself into and how things are going to click and work together to be successful. Okay. And again, we have plenty of other classes available on all these various topics of gardening. Again, this is just kind of a little sampler to give you an idea of what's out there. So as far as native plants, there's a lot to choose from. When I first moved here from Chicago, and I told my friends in Chicago, I garden in the desert. Like, oh, you grow cactus? Well, yeah, but there's a lot more you can grow besides just cactus. And I was just amazed at the variety of things that we do have. This is one of my favorites. It's called the gopher plant, or Euphorbia rigida. You see these popping up a lot in newer shopping centers now, and they're blooming right now. They're absolutely gorgeous, and the local bees just love them. Okay, and then this is the globe mallow, which the native species is orange. And if you go out driving around in some of the areas that haven't been developed yet, you might see some of these actually growing and blooming around this time of year. Tortoises love them. Your native bees love them as well. Another one of my favorites is the chocolate flower, and it lives up to its name. When it's in full bloom and you walk past it, it's like somebody put some hot cocoa right under your nose. It smells beautiful. And if you keep taking off the spent blooms once they're done blooming, this will bloom for 9 months out of the year. That's pretty amazing, because most of your perennials, as you may know, they give you a couple 2 or 3 month window of blooming, and then they're done for the year. What's wonderful about a lot of these natives is that they will keep blooming for 8 or 9 months out of the year, and they're perennial, so you don't have to keep planting them every year. Okay, so those are some good choices. There we have our creosote bush up there. This is our local rush milkweed that can get to be 4 or 5 feet tall. If you don't want something quite that tall, if you want something a little more diminutive, then the Arizona milkweed is another good choice if you want milkweed in the yard. Okay. Oops, wrong way. Wrong one. Okay. Some other native plants. Again, we have seeds for most of these available through the university. This one is called the Princess Plume. It gets a beautiful yellow feathery plume, generally midsummer. Two of the penstemon that do very well here are the pink perii and the red firecracker penstemon. Another one of my favorites is the desert marigold. That will bloom 8, 9, 10 months out of the year too. And the foliage, it gets whiter over the summer because it protects the leaves from the intense sun. So it almost looks like Dusty Miller, if you're familiar with that, or like when you flock your Christmas tree and you spray that white stuff all over it, it looks like you took parsley and just spray the stuff all over it. Really pretty, even when they're not in bloom. Another one of my favorites is a low ground cover type. This is a local aster called fleabane, and it blushes to like a lavender purple color, which is very pretty. The datura is an interesting one. It gets a big white flower, like a tubular flower, though this one is considered to be toxic. The Paiutes used to use that for some of their spirit journeys. You know what I mean? Right, right. It contains belladonna alkaloids. Yeah. So this is one, if you like it, it's a beautiful plant. I mean, I would put it probably in the backyard rather than the front yard. You don't want it to be an attractive nuisance to any teenagers that have more curiosity than they have common sense, kind of a thing. Okay. But all of these are available. Okay. Also, if you wanted to see some flowers in action, come on down to our Paradise location where we have our botanical garden. These are some pictures I took a few years ago of the native flower wash at the university that is not on any irrigation whatsoever. This is just stuff that lives and thrives without any supplemental irrigation. We have poppies, bluebells. This is our tufted evening primrose, penstemon. There's the fleabane, and just lovely, lovely area that we have. And we do give free tours, and you call the helpline number. They can tell you when our tours are, or we could arrange for a special tour just for your club to come on out and have a free tour to see everything we have. We have an orchard there. We have a children's garden. We have compost area. We have an herb garden, vegetable gardens, as well as the native wash. So it's a wonderful complex if you'd like to come out and see all the stuff we're doing. Okay. So native plants tend to be a little bit of a challenge, and they don't always transplant well. So typically we recommend putting the seeds down where you want the plants to be, rather than starting them in pots and then trying to move them outdoors, because they generally develop a very deep and tender, delicate taproot that's difficult to move without making it difficult for them to carry on. Also, seed germination can be somewhat unpredictable. It can take many, many months for some of the seeds to germinate, so you have to be patient with some of them. And some seed varieties are, again, as we said, unobtainium out in the world. That's why we're trying to make as many available locally as possible. And the actual plants themselves, there are a few locations. Somebody mentioned the Special Projects Nursery up on the north side. Also our orchard up in North Las Vegas, they are also selling native plants. Cactus Joe's is now embarking upon making available plants. Yeah, we gave them some seeds, and we have one of our master gardeners working with Cactus Joe to have more native plants over in that part of town. And sometimes you'll hit or miss at some of the big box stores, but be careful if you buy something at a big box store. How are we doing time-wise? I'm not talking too much, am I? We okay? You're doing? I think we need to kind of start to. Okay, okay. Okay. Just one example. I bought a gopher plant because my girlfriend in Green Valley had just huge ones in her yard. They were just so gorgeous. I go into the Star Nursery, I buy a gopher plant, I bring it home, put it in the ground. 2 months later, it's dead. I go back, I buy another one, put it in the ground. 2 months later, it's dead. I was about to give up when I went to a garden talk at UNLV by another master gardener. And during the break, I told her my story. She says, I know exactly what to do. I'm like, oh, great. She says, go buy another one. bring it home. When you take it out of the pot, shake off all the potting soil they put it in and plant it in the native Nevada soil. Because all that potting soil left too much moisture around the roots and they got root rot. Now mine are this big and just gorgeous because they're in the native soil. That's what they evolved with. Okay, okay. We're going to move on here. Let me just tell you quickly my second hummingbird story. I was looking at my front yard, which is my front yard up there. We took out the grass, put in some native plants, and around the autumn, I wasn't getting a lot of color. So I went to the Springs Preserve plant sale. They have a plant sale in the spring and the fall. One's coming up early April, okay? And they sell native plants there, so it's a great place to go. And so I bought a Salvia greggii, which was in bloom, and the Mexican honeysuckle, the Justicia spicigera. And I brought them home in the little black pots, and I put one on one side of the olive tree and one on the other, just lay the pots on the ground. And then I came to the sidewalk to see if I liked the way it looked and if it was going to be a good spot for it. Not more than 10 seconds later, a hummingbird flies into my yard and he hovers around the red rose, which is up in the corner there, the red rose bush, kind of sit in front of that going, what the heck am I going to do with this thing? But again, they're attracted to the red. Then he notices what I had just purchased and he flies over to Salvia greggii and drinks something of that. Then he flies over to the Mexican honeysuckle and drinks all that, and he leaves. And I'm like, instant gratification. That was just so cool. It didn't take him more than 10 seconds to find those. I was just blown away. So again, build it and they will come. Okay, any other questions? Yes, let's bring this around so people can, and on Zoom can also hear the question. Thank you.
Hi, is it a little too late to plant trees such as like maybe a mulberry tree? I wait till next winter, or I still have a window?
Good question. We still have a window of opportunity now for trees. Probably by the end of April, I would stop. But anything up and down, the best time would be over the winter. Just for future planning, that's when they sell a lot of the fruit trees, December, January, February. But yeah, you could probably squeeze one in now. Okay, other question?
Do you have a recommendation on hummingbird feeders? I've tried several of them and I just wondered if you had a recommendation that works.
Humdinger.
Thank you.
Oh, somebody mentioned the humdinger, because that's a good feeder to have. Okay, I don't use hummingbird feeders, so I would not be a good person to ask on that, but the humdinger.
It's my favorite. It keeps bees and ants and all that out.
Okay, keeps bees and ants out, which is important. Yeah,
For
that's-
hummingbirds.
for hummingbirds, right. Any other questions in the group here?
We kind of need both. So she'll.
Do we need both of them? Yeah.
Yeah, let's see.
So for us apartment dwellers who only have the ability to plant in boxes, I have done the same thing, got stuff from Star Nursery and it's died every single time. So what can we do? What kind of native plants, especially to attract the hummingbirds? What can we get?
Okay, we're looking for plants that we can put in planters that will attract hummingbirds. Okay. Again, both of these are good candidates because both of these stay very small. The Salvia greggii stays very small, as does the Mexican honeysuckle. They stay very small and they have the tubular flowers that they would like.
And they're okay with the dirt from Star Nursery?
No, I would, well, what I generally do for these guys, they are not totally native to the Mojave. They would fall in that desert adapted category. So what I would do with these is I would take that potting soil, I would shake off whatever's loose, then I would mix that 50-50 with local soil and then pot it up in that. So that gives you a little better drainage. If you have some of the native more sandy soil, or if you don't have native soil, mix it 50-50 with like sand that you can get from the, you know, like a, yeah, come over. I got so much in my son's backyard. He hasn't finished landscaping in the backyard. So we got plenty over there. Go ahead and do that. That's a good question. Good question. Yeah, some of the, and also look at the plant label, see what things are going to stay smaller. Like a brittle bush, that'll get 5 feet tall and 5 feet wide. So no, you wouldn't want that. But your desert marigold would be a good candidate. Your chocolate flower would be a good candidate. Your globe mallows, your penstemon would all be good candidates for pots. Yes, Kathy.
Regarding the seed packets you're handing out today, if you're in transition, how long can you hold on to them before planting them? How long are they viable?
Okay, good question. How long are seeds viable? Typically, we put the year that they were collected on our seed packets. we try and give away seeds before they're 3 years old. It's just kind of a general rule of thumb, though there have been some native flower seeds that can bloom after 100 years. They dig them up from pots in the ground and they plant them and they grow. So it can be kind of amazing. But typically, if you're not going to use them right away, we would like to store them in a cool, dry place, put them in the fridge, for example, if you want to wait till the fall to plant them. This is kind of the closing window also for planting native flowers. We try and get those in as early as possible so they can develop a good root system before the heat hits. So if you are going to take some seeds today, either A, plant them pretty quickly, soon, or hang on to them until next winter.
With planting the native flower seeds, do you broadcast them, like scatter broadcast, or are you actually digging them into the ground, planting them in?
Okay, another good question. When we do give out the seeds, we will give out a little flyer that tells you how to do it, but that is a very good question. When you think in nature, a native plant out in the middle of nowhere, it's going to just drop its seeds on the ground. There's nobody burying those seeds. So a lot of the seeds need some sunlight in order to germinate. And some of them are so tiny, they're almost like a grain of sand or a little speck of salt, that if you planted them deep, they wouldn't be able to break through. So it's very simple. We just broadcast them on the ground. If they're very small, sometimes you can mix it with some sand so that they are more uniformly broadcasted. What I like to do too is take a few and put them like in one spot, concentrated, and put a little naming tag on that one. So when it comes up, I go, oh, that's what that guy looks like. Okay, and you can tell them from the weeds. Okay, so that may be helpful too. Okay, but be patient, because some of them can take months or years in order to germinate. Because if everything came up at once and it wasn't a good time in nature, they'd all die. So with your desert marigold, a couple of them will come up this month, and then a couple of them will germinate next month, and then the next month. Because in one of those times in nature, it'll be good and they'll survive. So they kind of hedge their bets by germinating over a long period of time. Okay. Yes.
This is tough because I was trying to get showing milkweed,
Yes.
which is less toxic than some of the milkweed. You have to worry about pets,
Right.
maybe a dog, and if you let your cats out temporarily, they could get sick.
Right.
How do we get that?
Okay. We do have another woman who's in charge of our butterfly project, and she's been working with at least a half dozen different types of milkweed at the university to see which ones the local butterflies like. And she does have some showy milkweed seeds. So I can take down your contact info before you leave, and then I can get you in touch with her. Is it too late now? Typically, the milkweed, we generally start those indoors. That's one of the few that we generally do start indoors in like December, January. But if you wanted to start them now indoors and then just wait till the fall to outplant them, then you can get started on your showy milkweed that way.
We have a question from Zoom.
Okay, we have a question on Zoom.
Can we get the seed packs mailed to us or pick up locally for those of us on Zoom?
Ah, very good question. Yes, we are located at basically Paradise and 215. That's our location for the extension office. If you do want to pick some up, you can come by the office. Generally it's from like 9 till 5. And we have master gardeners there who can provide you with some seeds that you can take home. Or if you call the helpline, we have a list that we can send to you, a PDF of all the different seeds that we have. You can pick ones that you want and they can send them to you. They weigh almost nothing. Yeah, so it's very easy for us to stick them in the mail to you if you live very far away from that location. Any other questions on Zoom? That was it? Okay.
Is there some of the flowers that we have so they can see?
Yeah, one of our flyers too we have there. This comes from the Nevada Division of Forestry, and it is also a wonderful resource to show you the different types of flowers that are available. Unfortunately, the Nevada Division of Forestry does not sell openly to the public anymore. They just sell to larger groups. So if you're with a condo association or a homeowners association, you might be able to get plants for some of your folks up there. They are exclusively native plants at NDF, but again, they don't sell openly to the public.
Yes. So there, she has a table back there with some literature. Thank you. Thank you, Gail. That was amazing. Thank you.